At this point, I'm just going to give a quick introduction. You can see there's a slide up about the structure of the day. But why is this important for the timber industry? Why do we keep going on about it? Why have we talked so incessantly about it? Well, 90% of the UK wood trade is with Europe or within Europe. And our position as the TTF has been quite straightforward and hasn't, unlike the government's, our position has not changed since June 2016. Our position has always been that we advocate for the UK government to demand a full trade deal with the EU. For us, whether you're in or out is not politically is not the point, but it is making sure that business remains as easy as possible for our members, and a trade deal is the best way to do that. We also wanted within that trade deal to minimize the EU border controls, all of the non-tariff barriers that are exerted upon our sector, to make sure that we maximize the potential of common standards and mutual recognition between countries, to encourage our members throughout this whole period to write to their MPs to show that no deal actually will very negatively impact your business and therefore the activity within their constituency, and to equalize the VAT processes between EU and non-EU imports. We worked out one of the first areas that we worked on, and I'll admit that we worked on it specifically for the headline, but we worked out that there was a £1 billion VAT bill from the timber sector in a no-deal Brexit. And the original VAT proposals that the government had put forward would have been very bad. Nick, I know, is going to tell you more about those. The government has moved from that position. They then wrote to us to say that they were adopting the proposals that we had put forward, and that there was a great success for the TTF and the Builders Merchants Federation and others who'd campaigned on this issue. Then the new government went back on that. Then they've come forward again, and Nick will tell you exactly where we are with the VAT. In addition, we have done a lot of work to make sure that TTF members are ready for Brexit. We've been talking a lot about the changes that are coming and trying to work out exactly the position of our members in relation to all the regulatory and operational impact changes that are coming. We know that the wood supply chains are fairly resilient and they've been operating for a long time and they know what they're doing. There's a significant volume of wood that is produced in the UK and that's processed in the UK. That's not going to stop. That shouldn't be massively impacted by the changes coming in. There are only minimal volumes arriving in on ro-ro ports in the southeast, so we feel that we are not going to be hugely impacted. There will be businesses which are, and I'm not trying to gloss over that for those businesses which are affected. But for the whole, when you look at the whole of the timber sector within the UK that's operating, that is a minimal part of it. The main volumes arrive on dedicated vessels using lots of different ports throughout the UK. So we spread the risk in different ports around the country, different road networks and so on when you come out of those ports. And there's not so many wood products which require the just-in-time management of supply chains, the specialist storage, all of the other aspects which are affecting a lot of other supply chains, a lot of other business sectors, and a lot of other sectors of the economy. So we're not overly worried about our members, or we are in fact confident that our members can control those bits which are within their control. However, there are likely to be indirect effects. The availability of HGVs for UK transport, the queuing and other road transport problems, issues with capacity on the part of the authorities themselves, knowledge and training on behalf of the authorities themselves, all of those things which are outside of our own control. If they come to pass, then wood supply is likely to be the least of the UK problems, but wood supply will definitely be affected by stuff that's outside of it. We want to make sure, though, that you can control all of the things which are within your control and that we can give you all the guidance you can possibly get to mitigate the problems which may lie outside of those sectors. So at that point, I am going to duck out and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Mr. Nick Boulton, who's going to talk you through all of the wonderful things which are coming your way in only, I think, just over a month's time. Nick.
Thank you, David. Well, to be precise, 38 days until the end of the transition period. So that's the 1st of January 2021. As I'm sure most of you will be aware, I'm Nick Boulton from the Timber Trade Federation, and I'm head of technical and trade policy. So Brexit really falls in my remit completely. So I've spent quite a lot of time over the last 2 years trying to develop information for members and make sure they're aware of all the information that they need in the run up to the 1st of January. So starting with the most important information. I know there's been a lot of discussion about a deal or a no deal, lots of political debate going on. But the reality is that regardless of whether there is a deal or a no deal, at the end of the transition period, which is on the 1st of January 2021, there will be a new international border around the UK and Northern Ireland. The UK leaves the EU Customs Union and the UK leaves the EU single market. When you say it like that, it sounds so very simple, but the reality is that we have been pegged to both the Customs Union and the single market for many years. And therefore changing away from that is going to create a huge amount of issues. If we move away from the Customs Union, or when we move away from the Customs Union on the 1st of Jan, there will be new controls, and failure to meet those new rules means that there is the potential to delay or prevent exit of goods coming into the UK, and equally for exports leaving the UK towards Europe. With that international border, there will be border controls, there will be new customs processes, there will be the potential of duty, and there will be new VAT processes. There will also be new requirements for plant health and for the trade, and for the use of wood-based packaging with the introduction of ISPM 15 arrangements. So when the UK leaves the EU single market, failure to meet the new rules that come with that won't necessarily delay entry of goods, but it may mean that the goods are not valid either on the UK market or on the EU market or on the Northern Ireland market. The kind of regulations we're talking about in terms of the single market, the two most critical are going to be the construction products regulation with its associated conformity marking, the CE mark that we're also used to, being replaced with the UK CA mark and the UK NI mark for those that are dealing directly with Northern Ireland. It's also going to be about the new UK timber regulation. So what happens on the 1st of January? Well, that's the position as at the 31st of December. We are part of Europe. And then on the 1st of January, we will sail our own boat and become Fortress Europe, I suppose some might say. But in reality, what it does is it puts a new international border where there hasn't been one for many years. The only border that we've seen for many, many years is the border with Europe, which has been open and easy to move goods through. One of the most critical things about the border and one of the biggest points of discussion has been the situation with Northern Ireland. And the Northern Ireland Protocol gives special status to Northern Ireland, meaning that in practicality terms, it remains part of the EU for the present time. That means that Northern Ireland businesses or businesses that are trading with Northern Ireland need to register with a new government service, which is the Northern Ireland Trader Support Service. So if you're doing business with Northern Ireland or you want to do business with Northern Ireland, I would really encourage you to sign up to that service so that you can get the information that's available. It also means that we need to, when we're sending goods backwards and forwards between GB and Northern Ireland, we need to identify those goods and to identify where they're going fundamentally. If they're only going as far as Northern Ireland, the government has given an assurance that there will be unfettered access. So that means that there will be no duty on goods flowing into Northern Ireland. But we also need to identify goods that are moving through Northern Ireland onto the main island of Ireland. So duty is paid where necessary. Adrian and Deanne will be talking shortly, but there's some information there about due diligence. We also have to remember that CE marking will remain the predominant conformity mark for Northern Ireland whilst the Northern Ireland Protocol is in place. So over the last 10 years and longer, we've seen very easy access and few controls between the UK and mainland Europe and Ireland. Basic controls in place for security, but apart from that, the flow of trade has been relatively straightforward. But as of the 1st of January, there will be important new basic controls of the border in place. Given the time frame for Brexit, the government has decided that it's not possible to put all the necessary border controls in place for the 1st of January. So there will be a staged programme through April and into the end of June, where further controls are going to be put in place. And that would be things like border control posts, which are currently being built and should be available on main roads and around ports or within ports from, I believe, 1st of April. The details for what's happening in terms of the new international border are given in the UK border operating procedure, which has been published by the government and which is available to download from the government website. This goes into quite a lot of detail about the things that are being put in place. So once the UK leaves the customs union, it's going to be important to look at the new customs processes that are being put in place, and they are that means that you're going to have to do customs declarations for products that are coming into the UK. Who is responsible for those customs processes is an important point. Incoterms and other international trade terms will give you a clue as to who is responsible, but in most cases it will ultimately be the UK buyer who is responsible for the customs declaration of goods coming into the UK. That means that there's going to be a responsibility on buyers to provide all the necessary identification numbers, such as the EORI and your VAT number, so that these can appear on shipping documents and other documents for goods coming into the UK. It will be up to the supplier to make an export declaration from the EU or to enter the goods onto port exit systems if they're coming onto a vessel. But it is the buyer that will be required to make an import declaration. And the buyer will also be responsible for import VAT and, where it's applicable, duty. The VAT and duty must be paid by the buyer at the point of declaration or deferred through one of the many systems that are being set up. So it's important that businesses are working now to find out how to declare goods at the border. This is going to be essential because, to give you some idea of the scale, in 2019, there were 55 million customs transactions for goods coming from outside of Europe. It's believed that there are 200 million customs trades with the EU in any year. So that means for 2021, our customs system is going to have to jump from 50 million transactions to something like 250 million transactions. So you can see the scale of the issue that's facing us. So it's really important that you identify how to declare goods, you identify the correct business identification numbers such as EORI and VAT numbers that your business needs. You also need to identify the commodity codes for the products that you import, because they are the way of identifying the products rather than normal descriptions. And once you've identified the product commodity codes, you'll be able to check the rate of duty that you'll need to pay, if any at all. You should also check if there's ways of making the importing process less painful. And the government has put some measures in place to try and help with that. So one way in which you can do that is to use a customs specialist or a logistics specialist to undertake customs entries on your behalf. You don't necessarily have to do them yourself. So you can, if you can find a third party, you can subcontract that work out. The government is also allowing businesses the opportunity to defer some of their customs entries up until June. So that if you bring goods in January, you have a few months in which you can potentially make the full declaration of the goods. It's important to check out the details of that, and they can be found on the government website. There are also additional customs mechanisms that have been in place for many years, and I know some members already use these. So these would be things like stock in bond, raw material imports through inward and outward processing facilities, and free ports, which I think Dafydd is going to mention in his presentation. I talked a moment ago about the potential for duty rates. It's important to say that the UK has published the new UK global tariff, and this will apply to all goods that are coming into the UK, unless the source of the country source or the country region has a specific trade agreement with the UK on different terms. So if we sign a deal with the EU, that will come in as preference for EU goods. If we don't sign a deal with the EU, the UK global tariff rates will apply. The other areas where they might not apply would be if a developing country has GSP status, for instance. There are not many of those left in the wood sector, or if there's a duty suspension or tariff quota, such as the coniferous plywood quota. So the UK global tariff has already been published. You can find information on it on the government website, and you can search for products by product code so that you can find the potential duty rate that you may have to pay if there's no deal, or you will have to pay if the goods are coming from outside of Europe and there's no other specific trade arrangements in place. So just looking at some examples in our sector then, all of these products will remain duty-free, and as you can see, this includes fuel wood, logs, railway timbers, basic sawn and plain goods are most important. That's the biggest section of the customs codes for us, but also veneered materials, profiled materials like skirtings and architraves, and packaging and pallets. So all of those would be duty-free regardless of what they're made out of. However, as with the European customs codes, we've got a whole range of wood-based panels that will be paying duty. Currently, they're paying either 7 or 10%. Under the new UK global tariff, they'll pay 6 or 10%. So most wood products will remain duty-free. So of the 200 customs codes that are available, 154 will remain duty-free. So in most circumstances, wood products will be duty-free. It's only those really that fall into the wood-based panels sector where we're currently paying duty, and we will continue to do so, although it will be at a lesser rate. So just a quick point about commodity codes. Where we've been trading within Europe in recent years, intrastat has been the way that we undertake that trading, and intrastat codes are 8 digits. So most of you will be used to using 8-digit customs codes to undertake your intrastat declarations. However, goods coming from outside of Europe that are entered onto the UK Customs Chief system have used 10-digit codes. So it's not quite clear at the moment whether for all imports we're going to need to use 8-digit codes or 10-digit codes. I think if we're going to use 8, then that will require some amendment of the UK Customs system, but I can't find any information specifically saying what level of customs commodity codes are actually going to be used. If we do reduce down to 8 digits, then we will lose some of the flexibility or some of the product descriptions within the timber sector, but very few really. The only one that's I think is going to prove quite difficult will be coniferous plywood, and around the coniferous plywood quota, which is currently a 10-digit code. So we're going to need to look at that in a bit more detail. As Dave said in his introduction, there's been an awful lot of discussion about VAT and the changes that are going to happen to VAT processes. For timber importers bringing goods from outside of the EU, VAT, import VAT, has had to have been paid at the point of entry. So for many years, if you're bringing goods into the UK from outside Europe, you had to pay the VAT when they arrived. Whereas for goods that are traded within Europe, as most of you will know, you can declare the VAT related to those goods on your quarterly VAT returns. So that's a potential difference of 3 months between when you have to pay the VAT. The government has changed its stance a number of times on this and has looked at a variety of different options, but it's quite clear now that they are going to work with a system that is close as possible to the current EU system. So that means that you're going to be able to declare your VAT on your quarterly VAT return. So there's some rumours going around that overseas suppliers are going to have to register for UK VAT or add UK VAT to their invoices. This is incorrect. There is no such requirement as far as I can see. UK import VAT will be added at customs declaration for the buyer's account, and the buyer will account for that on their quarterly VAT return. In order to be able to do that though, the EORI number and the VAT for the number for the buyer must appear within the customs declaration, and that's why that information is so important. One of the other areas where we're looking at additional controls will be in terms of plant health. So what's happening here? Well, we already have a measure of plant health controls on wood products within the European Union. And those plant health controls are done by what's called a plant passport, which is a document that appears as part of the normal trading document. It's a set of information that sellers are obliged to be putting on their documentation. That system's going to have to be withdrawn, so no more plant passports, because it's now an international border. Those are going to have to be replaced with phytosanitary certificates. So if you're currently trading in products that require plant passports, you are going to need phytosanitary certificates in the future. So what does that actually mean in terms of our main product groups? Well, for coniferous wood with bark, there will be the same plant health controls that are currently in place, while processed woods that have had the bark removed, except if they come from Portugal or Spain, will be able to travel unheeded. The Forestry Commission has suggested that it will be useful to put on commercial documents that the goods were free from bark, as that may help to prevent any delays. Hardwood traders are going to see the most significant change, really, because there was a set of legislation that was coming in place within the European Union, and that has been adopted by the UK immediately. And that means that there are new requirements for EU species such as beech, birch and ash, but excluding oak. And these are to protect UK forests against Asian longhorn beetle and other pests. These materials will require phytosanitary certificates, and they will require declaration ahead of arrival, and they will likely require inspection of goods. So if you're trading in those products from the EU, from particular countries within the EU, then you need to check out those regulations. It doesn't apply to all European countries, just named countries for those materials. Wood-based panels traders, the full processing of wood products for wood-based panels generally exposes the material to sufficient pressure and heat so that plant health controls are not normally required. ISPM 15. So because we now have an international border, there is a requirement, an international requirement, that all wood packaging that crosses that border will need to be ISPM 15 compliant. And that is a registration scheme which heat treats the goods to make sure they are pest free. It's important to say that for wood products, so where you're buying and selling wood products, ISPM 15 does not apply to very thin sticks that are used to stabilise the packs. It also doesn't apply to integral bearers that are strapped to the pack of timber, provided they are made of the same material as is in the pack and have been treated in exactly the same way. And also wood that is going to be used to make pallets or packaging doesn't necessarily have to be ISPM 15 stamped, because it's not being traded as packaging, it's being traded as wood. However, once it's made into a pallet or a package, a pallet collar or a packing case, then that piece of material will need to be ISPM 15 compliant. John Dye is speaking at our webinar tomorrow, and we've got more information from Timecodes, the Pallet and Packaging Federation, on the TTF website. So moving away from border controls to single market controls. The two most important features or the two most important pieces of regulation will be the Construction Products Regulation and the UK Timber Regulation. Failure to meet these regulations will not necessarily delay entry of the goods, but it may mean that the goods are not valid or not acceptable for the UK market. So looking at the CE marking, the Construction Products Regulation, first of all, the CPR, the Construction Products Regulation, has been in place since 2013. It's been amended and entered into UK law to facilitate the UK exit. However, the most important point about the Construction Products Regulations is that UK notified bodies will lose their CE marking status from the 31st of December this year. So in practical terms, this is the most pressing date, and it means that companies that are overseen by UK notified bodies must make a change by the end of the year. Your UK notified body should have already been in touch, and I'm sure they have been, and they should be offering you two options. One is that you switch to a European notified body and carry on CE marking, For both the main UK notified bodies, that's quite straightforward because they have European sister companies that they can transfer your certificate across to. The alternative is that you stay with your UK notified body and commence UK CA marking from the 1st of January. So those are your two options if you're currently with a notified body. If you are with a European notified body, you don't need to make a change by the end of the year, but you do need to be aware of these two dates. So for the whole of 2021, from the 1st of January to the 31st of December, CE and UK CA marks will be valid on the UK market. Both will be equally valid. From the 1st of January 2022, only the UK CA mark will be valid on the UK market. That is the information that has currently been provided by the government. Whether that stays in place, whether that date's extended, we don't know. But it does seem quite a short timetable, and quite a number of bodies within the Construction Products Association have already questioned that date. So just looking quickly at the options that are available. So in this diagram, we have the conformity marks across the top, and we have the markets on which they're placed down the left-hand side. So looking at CE marking, so CE marking is valid on the GB market, on the Great Britain market, up until the 1st of January 2022. It can appear on the product thereafter, but it can't be shown as a means to show conformity. In terms of Northern Ireland, the CE mark is the acceptable mark for indicating conformity, and equally for the EU, CE marking is the sole acceptable mark to indicate conformity. Looking at the middle column, UK CA marking is the valid method of indicating conformity starting on the 1st of January 2021 in the UK. So that's the sole acceptable mark. It then becomes the sole acceptable mark from the 1st of January 2022. You can't use the UK CA mark to supply goods for Northern Ireland. You have to use the special UK NI mark for that, but they can be carried on the product. And obviously the UK CA mark is not suitable for indicating conformity in the EU, but it can appear on the product because the UK is no longer a member state, so it's not a conflicting mark. The UK NI mark is not suitable in Great Britain, but it is the acceptable mark for indicating conformity in Northern Ireland. That mark is really the most important one for companies that want to carry on trading just with Northern Ireland and are registered with a UK notified body. For any of those options, please speak to your notified body. Okay, so to finish up then, what should businesses be doing? You should definitely be making sure that you're familiar with all of the EU exit resources that are available on the TTF website. These are specifically targeted at timber companies, so it's the best source of information for timber traders. There's lots of information on the UK government website, but that applies to all sectors and all aspects, so it often takes an awful long time to plough through that information to find what you're looking for. The other things that you should be doing is if you're involved in bringing goods into the UK in any way, you need to be trying to get a grant to take courses on the UK Customs Academy. I would really recommend that companies put some of their staff through these courses, just so that as a business, you have an understanding of customs processes and the requirements that are being placed on you as a business. It's a great opportunity, and as I said, grants are available for both training and technology. You must identify the commodity codes for the products that you're trading across the border. That's what's going to determine whether you pay duty or not. So it's only by identifying the commodity codes that you'll know whether you are likely to pay duty in the event of a no deal for goods coming from Europe. I can't make this third point any more strongly than I do. It's about communicating with your supply chain to minimize any disruptive changes. It's going to be essential that you communicate between buyers and sellers to ensure that you're absolutely clear about who is going to undertake the customs declaration and who is going to be responsible for things like due diligence under the UK timber regulation. Communication with your supplier is essential. Please don't forget that. And then finally, as I said, if you're intended to register, if you're intended to deal with Northern Ireland, you must register for the Trader Support Service. This will take care of some of the customs aspects, and I'm told the government will carry the costs for that. So just to, as my last slide then, remind you about the TTF Brexit Guide, preparing for the 1st of January 2021. That's available on the TTF website and is easily downloadable. And thank you for participating in today's event. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you very much, Nick. Just before then we go on to and hand over to our next speaker, there's just a couple of questions I think people want clearing up on. Number of questions, a lot of them around CE marking, and then a few on plant health. So just on the CE mark, the UK CEA mark, if I am and to sum up a lot of the different ones, if I'm a sawmiller and I sell into all of those jurisdictions, the Europe with the CE mark, UK with the UK CA mark, and Northern Ireland with the UK NI mark, do you need all three stamps on your goods?
For the whole of 2021, the CE mark will be sufficient for all three markets. So I would advise suppliers in the short term to stick with the CE mark using a European notified body. That way they can sell the same goods on any of the three markets right up until the end of December next year. After that, yes is the answer. If you want to sell to all three markets, you're going to need all three marks. But I think for Northern Ireland, you will be able to use the CE mark. So in reality, if you're outside of the UK, selling to the UK market and to the European market, just the CE and the UK CA marks will be sufficient. And
of course, that would mean two different notified bodies, a European one and a UK one.
Yeah, they are separate marks. As of the 1st of January, the requirements to meet them will be exactly the same, but you will need two separate registrations to apply the mark. During next year, there might be some form of mutual recognition. The deal itself with the EU might contain some element of mutual recognition for notified bodies, which means that we can start down that route. But if not, during next year, it's a really important thing that we work on getting mutual recognition or a system whereby overseas notified bodies can apply the CE mark. That's absolutely essential, and the sooner we can start work on that, the better. Unfortunately, the UK government's not really interested in starting work until after the 1st of January.
Yeah, no, we've noticed that they're not quite so open to questioning and scrutiny as we would like. You'd almost think that they are making it up and don't have the answers. Plant health was another area. People were asking why oak was excluded in those plant health regimes, and why and whether we think that will be included afterwards.
Okay, for the particular pests that the regulations are trying to protect against, oak is considered a resistant species. So for the particular pests involved, oak is not necessarily immune, but it's not likely to carry that pest. There are other pests that oak does potentially carry, particularly the oak lacewing moth, which we may see further future controls on.
shortly, but I am going to transfer over to Adrian Hawkes of the OPSS to update us on particularly on due diligence requirements and changes to the due diligence requirements post-Brexit. Adrian, are you with us? And can you share your screen, please, for your presentation?
I'm with you if you can hear me.
Yep.
And I've just started to share the screen, so let me know if that's
it. That's up. Thank
Perfect.
you very much.
Not a problem. I'll try and put it into presentation mode at least. Yep. Okay, terrific.
There we are. There we go. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Okay, so as David mentioned, I'm just going to talk to you today a little bit about the timber regulations and what the changes will be for businesses in the UK following the end of the transition period. So I'll discuss a little bit to begin with about what the existing obligations are for business, then look at the new arrangements in Great Britain, and then lastly, the new arrangements in Northern Ireland, as there's a bit of a difference between the two, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail towards the end. So I know that the main question that people will have is obviously going to be what happens at the end of the transition period. But I think it's important that we start off with a bit of a shared understanding, as it were, and kind of recap what the existing obligations are. And this will make it easier to explain what will remain the same, what will change, and how to prepare yourselves for that. So the purpose of the European timber regulations is obviously to prevent illegally harvested timber and timber products being placed on the market. Not all timber products fall within the scope of the regulations. Annex 1 lists the products by commodity code that are included. And the regulations then create obligations for two groups of people, so operators on the one hand and traders on the other. An operator, as you'll be aware, is a business that first places the product on the EU market, whereas a trader is a business that purchases a product that has already been placed on the EU market. And I'll discuss those obligations in a little bit more detail in the next slide. There are two instances where a product may fall outside the scope of the timber regulations. So where a flagged license accompanies the import, and the flag licenses come as a result of a voluntary partnership agreement. And currently the only country with which there is a voluntary partnership agreement is Indonesia. But the other instances where the timber or timber product is accompanied by a CITES permit. And so in both these cases, in flagged and CITES, the timber is considered legal and falls outside the scope of the timber regulations. So as I mentioned, the timber regulations creates obligations for two categories of people, operators and traders. Operators are required to exercise due diligence when placing timber or timber products on the EU market for the first time, and to maintain and regularly evaluate the due diligence systems that are being used. Traders, on the other hand, are required to identify the operators or traders who have supplied the timber or timber products to them, and where applicable, identify the traders to whom they have supplied the timber or timber products. So, as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of the timber regulations is to prevent illegally harvested timber being placed on the market. The main obligation that this creates for operators is to have in place a due diligence system which ensures that the risk of illegally harvested timber being placed on the market is negligible. So there are three elements to that due diligence system. Firstly, access to information. So having a good understanding of your supply chain, having the documentation to account for the movement of the timber through that supply chain, from the point of origin through to the point that you place it on the market. Oops, I beg your pardon. The risk assessment is the second element of the due diligence system. So assessing the risk of illegally harvested timber entering the supply chain. And lastly, risk mitigation. So where you've assessed that the risk of illegally harvested timber entering your supply chain is not negligible, that you take mitigating actions to reduce the risk to negligible, or don't place the product on the market. So having gone through what the existing arrangements are, and I appreciate that that will be familiar to a lot of you, I want to look now at what the position will be following the end of the transition period. So from the 1st of January 2021. So from the 1st of January, Great Britain, so that's England, Scotland and Wales, will have its own timber regulations. Northern Ireland will remain subject to the European timber regulations as set out in the Withdrawal Act and the Northern Ireland Protocol. So there'll be separate arrangements in place for Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I want to talk first about the arrangements in Great Britain, and then I'll address Northern Ireland later in the presentation. So the two key questions about what will happen following the transition period, the end of the transition period, are obviously who will have obligations under the new timber regulations in Great Britain, and secondly, what will those obligations be? So the answer to the first question, who will have obligations under the new timber regulations, is that it will continue to be operators and traders, and that's what this slide illustrates. However, the definition will change slightly. So under EUTR, an operator was a business that placed timber on the EU market for the first time. The UK legislation will define an operator, on the other hand, as a business that placed the timber on the GB market for the first time, so England, Scotland, and Wales. Similarly, a trader will now be someone who purchases timber that has already been placed on the GB market rather than the EU market. So the main change is really in relation to which market the product has been placed on. And as you can imagine, we're now dealing with the GB market as against the common market. But otherwise, the definition of an operator and a trader remains the same. Still someone who places the product on the market for the first time for an operator. It just depends which market it is. In terms of the second question that I referred to, the what are the obligations for operators and traders under the new legislation? So having defined who operators and traders are under the new legislation, what are they required to do, and what are they required to do to comply with the legislation? Quite simply, they remain the same. And it's, again, just a question of the scope changing from the EU to GB. So operators under UKTR still need to exercise due diligence when placing products on the GB market. And they still need to maintain and regularly evaluate that due diligence system. The due diligence system itself follows exactly the same format and exactly the same threshold as the existing due diligence requirements. And that's why I was at pains to draw those out a little bit earlier in the presentation. They'll remain exactly the same. So operators under UKTR will still need to undertake a risk assessment to ensure that the risk of illegally harvested timber entering their supply chain is negligible. For traders, on the other hand, it remains a question of identifying who the operator or trader was who supplied them with the timber. The key change, again, is in relation to the market. It's a question of it changing from the EU to GB, but the due diligence and the components of having a compliant due diligence system remain the same. So I want to speak briefly about businesses exporting to the EU. This now lies outside our area of enforcement. So, you know, although it lies outside the area of enforcement, it'll still be relevant for many businesses, obviously, who have a market in Europe. So I just want to touch on it briefly. In the same way as businesses based in Great Britain and importing from the EU will now become operators, EU businesses importing from companies based in Great Britain will become operators at the end of the transition period. So this means that in order for them to comply with EUTR, they will need to carry out due diligence and may therefore request more documentation from the business in GB to demonstrate the legality of the timber in their products. I won't go into more detail on this just now, but I did just want to flag it as it's obviously another, you know, the other side of the coin here, and you know, the issue that a lot of businesses will come up, you know, within in the near future. As I said earlier about flagged and CITES, under EUTR, if a timber product is accompanied by either a flagged license or a CITES permit, it's considered legal under EUTR, and the operator doesn't need to undertake due diligence on the product or the supply chain for that product. This will remain the case under the UK timber regulations. And the reason for that is that a voluntary partnership agreement has been agreed between the UK and Indonesia, and this will come into effect at the end of the transition period. So this will allow flagged licenses to be issued for products being exported from Indonesia to the UK. However, this agreement is separate from the EU-Indonesia Voluntary Partnership Agreement. So FLEGT licenses issued for export to the UK will only apply to imports that are direct between Indonesia and the UK. If they're issued under the EU-Indonesia agreement and go via the EU, then due diligence will need to be carried out by the operator in Great Britain, who's placing the product on the market here. CITES, on the other hand, is a multilateral agreement, which isn't dependent on the UK's membership of the EU. And so trade covered by CITES permits will not be affected at the end of the transition period. So, as I mentioned earlier, I just want to talk a bit about the arrangements in Northern Ireland and how those are different from those in Great Britain. So Northern Ireland will be covered by the Northern Ireland Protocol, which means that Northern Ireland will continue to be regulated under EUTR. I'll talk through some of what that means in the next slide and what the practical effects of that are. OPSS will still have responsibility for enforcing the regulations in Northern Ireland. So we'll be enforcing UKTR in Great Britain and EUTR in Northern Ireland. So in practical terms, what does all that mean? There are 4 scenarios that I want to look at in a little bit more detail, and hopefully that will illustrate a little bit better what this means in practice. So the first scenario is timber moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So if a business in Northern Ireland brings in a timber product from Great Britain, the business in Northern Ireland will need to undertake due diligence to ensure that they're able to comply with the due diligence requirements under EUTR. So this modifies the existing position and means that there will be a new process at the end of the transition period for businesses in Northern Ireland to follow if they're sourcing a product from a company in Great Britain. The second scenario is timber moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. So if a business in Great Britain brings in a product from Northern Ireland, there'll be no new checks. The reason for that is to give effect to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which says that there'll be no new checks on goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. This replicates the position today and means that there won't be any change to the existing arrangements at the end of the transition period if a business in Great Britain is sourcing a product from a company in Northern Ireland. The third scenario is timber moving from the EU to GB. So if a business in Great Britain imports timber from an EU member state, the business is an operator and will need to undertake due diligence to comply with the requirements of UKTR. Now, this modifies the existing position and means that there will be a new process for businesses in Great Britain at the end of the transition period. And that's what I was talking about at greater length in the earlier part of the presentation. The last scenario here is timber moving from the EU to Northern Ireland. So if a business in Northern Ireland buys timber that has already been placed on the EU market, that business is considered to be a trader. And again, that replicates the position today, meaning that there will be no change to existing arrangements at the end of the transition period. So just in terms of where to go to from here, obviously, there's a number of resources that we have available, for people to keep up to date with changes and with information and support as we move forward. A lot of information on our website, and we have updates, email updates, and a newsletter which you can subscribe to, and other tools there to support you with completing due diligence and understanding what the requirements are. I won't go into too much detail there, and when I send the slides through to David for circulation, I'll include some more detail about the links there, and hopefully those will be of some use. So that is everything from me. I'll stop sharing now and hand back to David.
Okay, Adrian, thank you very much indeed. I know you have to duck out shortly. So there's a couple of quick questions for you. I think, let me just have a look. There's a couple of questions very simply with regards to operators and traders. We're a general merchant. The majority of products come from the UK-based supply chain. but we do also purchase from the continent. If we continue to purchase from the EU, does this mean we need to change our status as a trader to become an operator? And I think the answer to that is yes. Perhaps you could.
Yes, that's correct. So if you're based in Great Britain and you're importing a product from the EU, then you're from an EU member state, then you'll need to undertake due diligence on that product, and that would mean that you're an operator. You don't need to notify us about your status as a trader or an operator. It's something that we enforce when we visit and engage with a business, and we'll ask them for the business for evidence that they've complied with those requirements. But they will be defined as an operator for those purposes and need to undertake due diligence.
And Adrian, just to be clear, I mean, this is a big change coming in now as regards to the UK timber regulation. Even though it operates in this according to the same principles, it will encompass a lot more businesses. Are you expecting to kind of be running a strict enforcement regime from January the 1st, or is that something you're just wanting to get people up to speed with by July, which is sort of the date when a lot of these other changes with customs and so on are expected to really kick in?
Sure. So I think we have to be clear that obviously the legislation comes into effect on the 1st of January, and we have an obligation to enforce what the legislation is, and obviously parties that are affected by that legislation have a duty to comply with it. Having said that, I think it's very important to recognize what our function is as an enforcement agency, and part of that is also to support businesses to comply. So whenever there have been legislative changes in the past, including the introduction of the timber regulations a few years ago, we have spent a considerable amount of our time reaching out to businesses through webinars, through awareness raising activities, and other support to ensure that they are given that ability to comply. And our emphasis is on that, and that would be our approach as well going forward. I don't want to start getting into exact dates and that. The exact date literally is the 1st of January. That's when the new requirements come in, and under the law, businesses have to comply with that. But in terms of how we structure our activities, we'll certainly be continuing to engage with businesses as we have been doing up to now, and making sure that we give them all the support that we can to assist their compliance as we get into the end of the transition period.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's a couple of other questions which come up every time we talk about the EUTR, and now the UKTR, about FSC and PEFC. I think we can safely say you still need to do due diligence on those. Yes.
So FSC certification or PEFC certification can be used certainly as evidence that you've tried to mitigate the risk in your supply chain. It might cover off certain points, but it's not simply a substitute for having undertaken due diligence. And you still need to see evidence of that the operator has undertaken due diligence right throughout the entire supply chain. Often the certification will address one element of that supply chain. It won't necessarily address the whole supply chain. And sometimes the scope of what that certification is covering is different, either in terms of the legality, or indeed the scope of the products and species that are being covered by the certification as well. Might be slightly different from what the risk is. But certainly, if there's still the possibility, and certainly other risks that won't necessarily be picked up by it. So operators certainly need to do that.
So I've now heard Nick and Adrian speak, and now I'm completely intimidated by the level of detail that they've been able to go to. I should say from the outset that I'm not in any way an expert in the timber sector, but I can hopefully speak with a reasonable amount of authority about what's going on inside the ports and how we're preparing for Brexit and any impacts that may have. As has been said, my name is Dafydd Williams. I'm the Head of Policy, Communications and Economic Development for Associated British Ports in the Humber. So I'm focused particularly on the 4 Humber ports and the work that's done in that area, but I can talk about the group as a whole as well. So what I hope to do this afternoon is just give you a little bit run through about ABP, because I think it's probably useful setting the context. And in particular, I'm going to focus and drill down on the 4 ports in the Humber. Bear with me, there is a reason why I'm going to do that and explain why I'm going to talk them through. I'll talk a little bit about how we handle forest products, particularly timber, of course, in the Humber. And then I'm going to get into the meat of the issue around the impacts of Brexit. And then thinking a little bit about the future in terms of free ports and also what the industry can be helping to be doing to prepare to go through. I should say from the outset, introduce the company as a whole. I mentioned at the start that the TTF didn't take a view in terms of whether we should be inside the EU or outside. The ABP is absolutely the same. We are not a political organisation. Didn't take a view solely focused on whatever the decision made by voters and then by politicians. Our work is here to ensure that whatever happens works, and that there is a free flow of trade, whatever the situation that we inherit at the end of it all. So looking at ABP as a group, as has been referenced, we are the biggest port operator in the UK. We've got 21 ports located throughout the United Kingdom. There are 2 in Scotland, 5 in Wales, and the remainder are spread all across the whole of England, essentially in any part of the English regions where there is a coastline. We have ports that we operate from. We also have a significant rail investment, so we operate rail lines in various parts of the UK and have a major rail terminal in Hams Hall, located near Birmingham, as a major hub for rail and moving freight around the United Kingdom. And as worth setting as a context, it says on there that we handled 85 million tonnes of cargo in 2017, the most recent figure that we had stats for. To put that into context, that is 25% of all of the UK's trade is handled by Associated British Ports. So when we can talk about the port sector, when we talk about ABP, we're talking about handling basically a quarter of all of our trade. And there's an awful lot of jobs, 84,000 jobs, and 5.6 billion pounds to the economy every year associated with the work that we do. But I'm going to focus in particularly on the 4 ports that we have in the Humber. And the reason for doing that is simple. Around 30% of the UK's timber either comes in or out of the 4 ports in the Humber. The biggest concentration by far of movements of timber come through the 4 Humber ports. And so it's quite important, I think, to focus on what's going to be the impact on the Humber, because that is actually going to have a bearing on how the timber sector responds to Brexit and how it deals with it into the future. So thinking about the offer that we have in the 4 Humber ports, we're clustered around the Humber estuary. We have the ports of Hull, Goole, Immingham and Grimsby. And one of the things that's quite nice talking to the timber sector is it's one of the very few products that we have that is handled in all 4 ports. So we have specialisms in various ports. Timber is something that we handle across all 4 ports. And combined, we handle 17% of the nation's trade, a really significant volume as of 2018, and a really major operation, around 40,000 shipping movements every year, with a vessel traffic services, essentially an air traffic control for shipping, managing all of those shipping movements in and out of the Humber and throughout. And the clear predominance of or to the European Union. There are some products that we handle that are outside of that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the vast majority of what we do comes from the EU or is going out to the EU. So clearly the Humber is particularly affected by any changes that are made as we leave the European Union, leave the customs union and the single market. So focusing down on the 4 ports in particular, Port of Hull is probably one of the ports that is of most significance and relevance to the timber sector, because we handle more timber there than in any other port in our network of 21 ports around the UK. The Port of Hull is a big port in its own right. It has a major operation as a passenger ferry terminal, operating routes to Zeebrugge and to Rotterdam on the continent. Moves around about 1 million customers every year through passenger traffic. We have a big container terminal which has just recently expanded. We invested around £14 million in the expansion of the container terminal located there, handling general products, and indeed quite a bit of timber comes through the container terminal there. That expansion was done on a purely speculative basis to see if, on a build it and they will come basis, the result of which was that we've gone from around 5 sailings every week that come in and out of the port to around 15 on the basis of that investment. We also handle lots of general products for the building sector, the construction sector, building aggregates, scrap metal, biomass, and the major expansion in the Port of Hull has been for Green Port Hull, which is a new wind blade manufacturing facility that manufactures the blades for the offshore wind sector, one of the biggest growing parts of our energy mix in the UK. And that's brought around 1,100 new jobs to the local area in manufacturing. You can see there on the picture the scale of the Port of Hull. The city is up on the top part of the screen, is just the outer edges of the port. The whole vast area that it takes in, it gives you some sense of the scale of the port. And actually the Hull is not the biggest part of even the Humber, because the biggest part of the Humber, and indeed the biggest part of the port sector in the UK, is the Port of Immingham. It handles a huge amount of timber through this port, but many, many other things besides. The Port of Immingham is in fact the biggest port in the UK by tonnage. It has a hugely significant role to play in the UK economy. In particular, 10% of the nation's energy is supplied with products that come through the Humber ports. So when you think that 1 in 10 homes and businesses, the lights are kept on by what goes on in the Humber ports, you get a sense of its scale. Around 25% of the nation's refined oil to go into fuel for our vehicles comes through our oil terminal. And then a huge supply of basically every cargo that goes through. So the construction sector, the agricultural sector, timber, steel, bricks, liquid bulks, and so on, as well as a large and recently expanded container terminal that's had around £36 million invested in it in the last year to expand and get ready for the extra volumes that we expect to see through the Brexit process, that the government consider the Port of Immingham to be a nationally strategic asset. As a consequence of that, we regularly get calls from the Cabinet Office to check, are things okay, to monitor us, to have emergency exercises there, because if something were to happen to the Port of Immingham, it would have a major impact on the UK economy as a whole. And then our smaller ports in the Humber, the Port of Grimsby, which still handles a great deal of timber, is predominantly associated though with the work of 2 cargoes, cars, the biggest import port for cars in the UK, but then also a growing and massively expanding role in offshore wind, in particular not the manufacturing here, this is the operations and maintenance of it. Grimsby has now become the biggest hub in the world for the operations and maintenance of offshore wind. And then finally, the smallest of our ports in the Humber, the Port of Boulton, still handles a great deal of timber, but it is an odd claim to fame that it is the UK's most inland port, but has really good access to road connections on the M62 and the M1, and is therefore a really good place to do business from if you're not looking for the just-in-time, quick, speedy turnaround of products. So thinking about the forest product sector and how it's handled in the Humber ports, as I've already said, it's something that's handled across all 4 Humber ports, and around just under a third of all of the forest, all of the timber that is coming in and out of the UK is coming through the 4 Humber ports. We've got a number of big name customers. That's not an extensive list that you've got, exclusive list in there. You've got others in there. And what's important to say is the vast majority of that timber that's coming in and out of the Humber ports is coming from the EU, particularly from Scandinavia, but the majority of it is coming from across the European Union. And so any changes that we see because of Brexit is going to have an impact on the timber sector as a whole. What I can say is that in terms of the recent trends that we've had, actually we've had a very good year, and I do wonder whether it'll come up in the Q&A session later about whether this is reflected across the sector as a whole. But year to date, we're actually 6% up on timber that we're handling in the Humber ports over the course of this year compared to last year. And we were not expecting it. So we actually budgeted for a reduction. We thought there was going to be a decrease, but we do think there has been a COVID impact. We have seen a big spike in the DIY market that seems to have been driving part of that. And we have seen that also being matched in the United States and that has led to pressures on the supply chain from Scandinavia, which has led to some supply issues that we've had in the Humber. We've also seen a similar impact in paper as well. So I think it's spreads across forest products, not simply just on timber itself. So to the meat of it, to the main part of what we want to talk about, which is the impact of Brexit. We've heard a lot about the 1st of January and what traders need to be aware of from there. But from the port sector perspective, the date we're really focused on is the 1st of July, because that's the date by which we have to be fully compliant with all of the customs checks and all of the border checks that happen through there. As a result of that, we're going to need really significant infrastructure changes to the way that we operate, and new facilities that will allow us to handle the products and check the products as they come through. So both the ports of Hull and Immingham, actually both Hull and the south bank of the Humber, it's actually in Grimsby, have border inspection posts, as they're called under the current regimes, but both of them are extremely small in scale. They are not checking any products that come through from the EU. They're only checking them from countries outside of the EU zone. And as a consequence of that, because the vast bulk of the number of products that we handle come from inside the EU, those two facilities are simply not designed and fit for the purpose that they're going to have to serve once we have the full arrangements after the 1st of July. We are therefore building 2 new facilities, a new border control post in the Port of Hull and a new border control post in the Port of Immingham to handle and checks that are going to need to be handled in all of the products. Now, the thing to say is, unfortunately, timber is part of that check regime. As a plant origin product, there will be impacts from that. We are currently in the stage where we have bid to the government for funding to help us with the infrastructure spend, because this was business that we weren't necessarily expecting to have, because depending on whether there was a deal or not, we weren't certain whether or not we would need new border control posts, and even if we did need them, what kind of scale they would need it to be built at. We've now done a design essentially built in on the assumption that there is no deal, a full-scale operation in both sides of that. But this is many millions of pounds of investment, and so we're looking to the government to help us to fund that. The new facilities are going to be really big in scale. They're going to need to be, because there's an awful lot of our products that are going to be brought in. Those products are going to be tested on a random basis, so there will be sampling being done. It's not every product that comes through that will be tested. It is a random sample basis. And there are a number of different agencies, not just the port operator, who are going to be involved in the running of the border control posts once this regime is up and running from the 1st of July. So the port operator's role is to, firstly, to bring the products into the ports and to get them off the ships. Once they've been identified that that particular product is going to go for a check, it's our role to get that product to the border control post. So we're laying on extra infrastructure to drive essentially the products from whichever terminal in the ports they are to the border control post. It's also our responsibility to ensure that those sites are secure. So we're laying on additional security staff and security arrangements to ensure that these are tightly controlled sites for obvious reasons. If you're in a control post within our border inspections. But what goes on inside the border control post is not the port operator's responsibility. That is done by a combination of the local port health authorities, so usually your local council, or sometimes a consortium of local councils who operate as the port health authority, and then UK Border Force. They are checking for various things to do with the health and the safety of the products. But then obviously from a border force perspective, they're checking for anybody who may be smuggled inside containers or on the backs of lorries to check for for anybody attempting to try and gain access to the UK in ways that they shouldn't be. This is going inevitably to slow down the flow of trade that we currently get through. So the vast bulk of that trade coming into to our Humber ports at the moment come through with no checking regime. The fact that we are going to have to sample probably a 1 in 10, we think, of the products that are coming through, that is going to cause some delays to the process. The good news is that unlike some ports in other parts of the country, and I'm afraid I'm going to single out Dover for a second because Dover is one of the ones that may be most adversely affected, They don't have particularly much land available to put on new facilities such as the border control posts. In the Humber, we have available land, we have that already earmarked, we have the plans already made, we're already in the process of talking to contractors to get everything built. It is going to be tight to get it built by the 1st of July, but the point that we want to make is once they're up and running, being located within the port area will keep disruption to a minimum. And we're optimistic that actually we hope once things are running smoothly, very little impact will be felt by the industry as a whole. And then I think it is important to not just focus on the potential negative impacts of Brexit, but to think a little bit about the future and what some of the opportunities are that exist as a result of that. Not directly tied to Brexit, but certainly there's a link. The government are strongly considering and now have put out a bidding proposal for the creation of free ports around the UK. In particular, they've suggested that they want to have 10 new free ports that they want to create around the UK, 7 of which will be in England. And England is going to move slightly ahead of the others. Both Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, they're as devolved bodies. They are going from their government arrangements within those regional areas to announce their plans for one each, essentially, in the near future. So I'm going to focus particularly on England for what's going to happen for the next part of it. Various port operators, in collaboration with other private sector businesses, as well as local authorities, local enterprise partnerships, combined authorities where they exist as well, are now being asked to consider to put bids in with the 5th of February as the final deadline for the submission of bids. The idea of free port status is to create a business-friendly environment for imports and exports of products, and in particular to boost manufacturing jobs in areas closely located to the ports. The concept behind them is straightforward. It's essentially to create a red line zone around not just port land, but land nearby to ports where there is potential for development. To put that outside, essentially, the UK tax zone for the purposes of dealing and handling with products. That means that you don't necessarily need, if you're inside a free port zone area, to be paying tariffs or any taxes on the movement of each individual product. So if you think about it from a manufacturer's perspective, one of the key advantages of that is if you're having to access raw materials, like timber, for example, if you're having to access component parts, and then indeed if you're exporting your final product, then you aren't having to pay a tariff on each of the individual movements. There could be really beneficial impact on this for the timber sector, we believe, because if you can boost manufacturing inside those free port areas, the timber will benefit as one of the raw materials that will be supplied, depending on what manufacturing is located in those areas. In the Humber, we have a really ambitious plan for what we think will be the biggest free port bid that will go into the government by the 5th of February, and that is for a Humber-wide proposal. So we want to take in all 4 ports within the Humber, but also quite a lot of land in between, working in collaboration with a number of our private sector colleagues and the local authorities in the area. To have a huge proposal that will handle not just the 17% of trade that's already in there that we already handle, but a significant amount of growth for manufacturing in that area as well. And our bid's going to be focused particularly around the energy sector in terms of things like the growth of offshore wind, manufacturing jobs in there, where timber has a big role to play because timber is heavily used in the manufacture of offshore wind products, particularly blades, but also to boost jobs in decarbonising our economy. The Humber is the biggest carbon polluting part of the UK, and so there's a big boost for green jobs in that area that we hope to see as a result of that. We would love to see TTF and other organisations from within the timber sector being supportive of the plans for free ports, because we can see this as a real boost and driver for economic growth as once we've left the European Union in full from the 1st of July. And then thinking about what you as a sector can do for us, it's already been stressed very heavily, but awareness is absolutely massive. It is still going to be the responsibility of traders to ensure that you have all the right documentation, all the right checks, all the right stamps, etc. on your products when you take it through the ports. It's not the port operator's responsibility to do that. And if you want to ensure throughput and a quick transit of your trades through the port sector, having everything ready in advance and planning for extra time is definitely going to be to your advantage, and we would keenly encourage those people to do that. And I would also mention again the free port status. I think if the timber sector as a whole can help to get behind that, you could help to unlock economic growth in your sector as well as other sectors beyond. That's probably enough from me.
Okay, Dafydd, thank you very much indeed. I think there's a few questions coming in, but I'm just going to pick up on a few. It's good to see, you know, when Brexit was first discussed, and I think we started having these conversations at the TTF, in the news, within our own discussions and things, it was all about, are the ports ready? And it seems like you're around the Humber as a company, you're making a lot of those investments already, or that they've already been put into place to cope with the changes that are coming. I guess you're getting a lot of these questions from all of the other sectors that you deal with as well.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think we've tried to tier our investments. Some of it's anticipation, so things like the container terminals. We've invested about £50 million in the Humber container terminals alone, in anticipation of, well, look, we're going to see slight changes in markets. We need to upscale our infrastructure to make sure that's ready. Some of it, though, the second tier has been around the infrastructure around the border control posts. We've delayed that deliberately because for a long time we've not known essentially whether we need to build a shed or a palace. Yeah. That's we've been waiting essentially for the details. We've now gone for, well, we're going to build the palace, because if we don't get it done in time, now we won't be ready for the 1st of July. So they are going to be really big facilities. The good news is that even if there is a last minute deal, that means we will have really state-of-the-art facilities ready for the 1st of July, because we're already now committed to doing that and underway with the process, which will mean that the products will go through those terminals really quickly.
So the investment is there one way or another, and it's all going to be speeding things up. In terms of though all of the different other products and sectors of the economy that you serve, what was there in your own planning, and this was something we'd heard previously, that you're going to have to make priorities according to national priorities? If you've got pharmaceuticals or food and things that rot, things that are time critical, and then back of the queue, large, heavy, cumbersome items like timber, that sit around. And I think the fear amongst many was, understandably, that was going to be back of the queue. And we've got to get these other things out, higher value, time critical. There's nobody wants empty shelves on supermarket, all that sort of stuff. Was that a planning process you'd had to go through as a port?
We have gone through a planning process and a prioritization process, but not taking it quite from the approach that you were thinking of. So for our approach, it's going to be what's going to be the impact on that area. So for example, our energy supply and our fuel supply is coming in. Well, you're talking about products like coal and biomass and oil. They're not really going to be impacted by customs changes. And also where we operate in the Humber, they're also not going to be impacted because the products are by and large not coming from inside the EU. So we already operate on a completely different regime. The bit and our prioritization is going to be, okay, what are the big products that are handled just in time, that are coming almost exclusively from the EU? And that is products like food, it is pharmaceuticals, and so on. And those are the things, and clothing as well is a big one that we predominantly get from inside the EU, and they're arriving in containers. At the moment, even if they're coming from further afield, so places like they might be coming from the United States or China on deep sea containers, they're not arriving directly into the Humber. They're arriving into ports like Rotterdam and Amsterdam and being transshipped onto smaller vessels and then brought into places like the Humber, or indeed into Ipswich as well, which is on Felixstowe and other places like that. That's really important because at the moment, their first the first EU port they land in, is not in the UK, the processing of coming from outside the EU into the EU is dealt with at another port.
Yeah.
And suddenly there's a dramatic change if they're having to go through that process twice. They're going to be processed arriving into the EU, transshipped onto a smaller ship, and then brought into another third-party zone in the UK and dealt with differently. So our priority process is going to be what's going to be the biggest changes and the disruption, and that's where we focus our priority. Bluntly, the timber sector is going to be largely, we think, okay, because the impact is relatively small on the timber sector as a comparison to others.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Good to hear. There's a couple of other questions. When you talked about, you mentioned plant health as one key area that would slow things down, and then you talked about building these border control posts and having a variety of different agencies within them. Have you got any kind of inside knowledge? The other points that come up quite regularly is that businesses are applying for funding to cope with the changes. Meanwhile, local authorities, who play a key role in all of this, are getting their budgets cut, and they're not able to put staff in. Do you have any kind of inside knowledge of how those different agencies are interacting, or have they done any sort of planning together on that?
Yeah. So there's a mixed picture, I think, across the piece. Some local authorities are a little bit behind pace, and some are really on it. So I will single out, for example, North East Lincolnshire, which covers Immingham and Grimsby area. They're really on it. They have absolutely got this. They've already started recruiting the extra staff they're going to need to work in these facilities once they're up and running, because they're not scaled up to deal with it in the way that they were expecting. The good news is, from a funding perspective, is that whilst absolutely local authority funding has been cut, this is actually an income generator for local authorities. So they're really keen to get this done because they know they can actually, this is a way they can make money. And in fact, for a number of local authorities with environmental health teams as part, and port health authorities as part of their environmental health teams, they cross-subsidise. So they make money out of the port health bit of it and subsidise some of the work in the environmental health area for that work. So there is a challenge, definitely there is a challenge, because we don't have anywhere near the number of people right now, as of today, trained to do this work. But most of them are actively recruiting now and have got training plans in place to make sure they're ready for the 1st of July when they need to be.
Okay, that's good to hear. Very good to hear. I hope it's a uniform picture around the country. Finally, just looking at the free ports, we've had, this has made big news, but we've heard little about it in the conversations with our members and things. It hasn't really cut through, I don't think, yet, until I guess until people have actually put their bids in. It sounds like with the Humber, if you're putting all 4 ports in as one big free port, you've got big plans there. So we had free ports before, and I can't remember exactly when the last one was closed in the UK. What's different now? Why are we going back to them? People decided they weren't working, or they weren't viable, or weren't an option previously. They were still allowed, but now we've gone back into them. So what's changed?
Well, they're not, as you say, they're not a new concept at all. They've existed in various parts of the world for a long time, and we've had them in the UK in the past. One of the biggest changes that's happened is that we're going to be outside of the EU. So the previous iteration of free ports was done whilst we were inside the European Union, and so the impacts of it were fairly minimal. If you sit outside the UK customs zone, you can see why the concept of a free port status suddenly becomes somewhat different to what we had previously when we were inside the customs zone. But I think the other bit that's probably different on this occasion is the real concern that's often been expressed about free ports in the past, and you'll still hear officials occasionally in places like the Treasury raise this concern, is displacement. Their concern is that all you're going to do is make it really attractive to do business in these particular zones, and manufacturers are just going to up sticks and move to those zones because it's slightly more attractive. They're essentially glorified enterprise zones, and you're not actually generating growth, you're just moving stuff.
Yeah.
This time, the difference is because the government have focused their attention very much around innovation. They do not want existing manufacturers in other places in the UK to up sticks and move to these areas. They want new jobs and new growth. So they've focused their incentives around new technologies, around decarbonising, around energy supply, and around manufacturing jobs in sectors that we don't currently operate in. And that, I think, is probably why this will be successful, is because it's purely focused on economic growth and not about just moving stuff around the UK.
Or you'll be well aware that we're used to presenting on the UK economy, presenting a forecast, one specific forecast for GDP growth for 30 different construction sectors. Clearly, we're in a bit of a different world than in previous years, where providing you with one specific forecast to one decimal place would be a bit ludicrous. So what we have are a couple of different scenarios based upon different assumptions for the UK economy and for construction, plus scenarios based around Brexit. So doing a summary of a 100-page construction scenarios document and another 50-page Brexit update will be quite challenging in the space of around 20-30 minutes, but I'll give it a shot. And my details are at the end of this presentation, so feel more than welcome to either ask questions in the Q&A or drop me an email, or if you're so inclined, DM me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to give you more detail about our scenarios. Okay, so in terms of the UK economy, I just have one slide on the UK economy because clearly our focus is on construction. But I've put together a chart of UK GDP. The black line is the data we have so far on the UK GDP, and in Q1, GDP fell 2.5%. In Q2, it fell a further 20%. So historic declines, understandably, given the initial lockdown. What we had in the third quarter is sharp recovery. And what we have on the graph is a blue-gray line, which displays what happens in terms of the recovery going forward if we hadn't had a second lockdown, which was our initial assumption back in the summer. And what's apparent now is our alternative scenario, which is shown in the green-gray dotted line, whereby we have a second lockdown, which means we have another dip in UK GDP in the final quarter of this year. But it's worth noting that this dip isn't as strong as we had during the second quarter of the year. Firstly, because construction and manufacturing continue, whereas at the end of March and April, construction and manufacturing largely shut down. Not only that, even on the services side, person-to-person interaction services such as cafes, bars, etc. have closed down, but a large number of services continue in this lockdown, which finishes on the 2nd of December, because they've gone through the experience of the initial lockdown. They know how to operate. They have social distancing measures, so they've been able to operate during this second lockdown. After this, what we're expecting is sharp recovery from the first quarter of next year. And this clearly assumes that we have a deal with the EU at the top line, top level deal, and detail for that would have to be worked out later over the next 12 plus months. So some degree of continuity there. But we're clearly more interested in construction. And what I've put together on this chart is construction output across some key EU countries compared with January 2020. So each month relative to January. And what we see is that German construction during the height of the social distancing restrictions, March, April, May, was not affected very much. It only fell 4.5%. You look at the other end of the scale, the light blue line, you have France, where activity fell very sharply in March and then even further in April, and French construction lost almost 70% of its output in April. But it had a very sharp recovery as well. Now, if you compare and contrast with the UK, where activity only fell slightly in March, but fell sharper than in most EU countries in April, albeit not as much as in France, but then it didn't recover as quickly as in France. And even in September, activity was 9% lower than it was compared with January. But it depends which sector you're in. Now I'll skip over that slide and just show you this slide where I've put together construction output so far this year across the 3 biggest construction sectors. And it illustrates the fact that how you've experienced this year depends on which sector you're feeding into. So the blue-gray line is infrastructure activity. And what you notice is that the vast majority of activity, even in April, still continued on infrastructure sites. And that's because infrastructure sites tend to be large sites with relatively few different trades mixing. And so activity could continue on most sites. It's easier to enact social distancing, if you like. And activity has largely been back to pre-COVID levels for the last couple of months. If you look at the other end of the scale, then private housing was the worst affected sector, and it fell very sharply in April, which is clearly obvious because most of the house building sites closed up almost immediately after the initial announcement on the 23rd of March, but then it's had a very sharp recovery. And that'll be clearly obvious from the fact that most house building sites are open and there's quite a bit of activity within the general housing market as well. And if you look at property transactions in October, in the general housing market, they were 8% higher than they were a year ago, based on the data that came out this morning. Commercial is a slightly different sector, which is one that wasn't affected as much as private housing, but even in September, it was still 20% lower than pre-COVID. And that's because even though most commercial sites are open, you have certainly 1/3 of the UK commercial market is within London. And when you're working on commercial towers, then there are issues about social distancing and the numbers of different trades that can all mix together. What that means is that productivity is lower than pre-COVID. So a lot of the commercial towers that were expected to finish this summer are actually going to be finishing towards the end of this year or in the first quarter of next year. Looking at a bit more recent data covering October, these are the purchasing managers indices, which is a survey covering around 200 contractors. And the light green line is private housing. Anything above this 50 line shows month-on-month growth. And what it shows is clearly significant growth on the house building side, even in October. Commercial has slowed and is broadly flat at that level, around 20% lower than pre-COVID. The civil sector is probably not one of direct relevance to most of you, but strangely, the PMI indices show that civils activity has been falling for the last 3 months, according to the PMI, but that's not in line with most of the contractors I've spoken to, who say that activity on civil engineering projects is high and it's rising in all areas except for airports, understandably, given the lack of tourism activity continuing, and then local authorities who are financially constrained, and activity is falling on that side of civils work. Okay, that's data that we have so far, but we're more interested in what's occurring in terms of the recovery. And on the positive side, activity got back on site after the initial lockdown a lot quicker than we would have anticipated. Social distancing hasn't been as strong as it was in April and May. The furlough scheme across the economy has delayed sharp increases in unemployment, so spending across the economy has been sustained and recovered significantly. Homeowners, an increasing proportion of homeowners have been working from home, which means that it's been easier for them to undertake refurbishment projects. There's no sign that they have any concern about SME contractors working in their home, even during this second lockdown. In terms of housing policy, the stamp duty holiday and the extension of the completions deadline for Help to Buy means that there should be sustained demand over the next few months. And most of the house builders we've spoken to say that they're expecting demand at least until March to be sustained, but they don't have much visibility after that. On the infrastructure side, then you've got clients with certain finance, which is public sector, regulated sectors. Not only that, they've got a large pipeline of major projects and frameworks, so stable demand and rising demand, and we'll hear more about that with the National Infrastructure Strategy that comes out tomorrow. And then there's government policy, which is also stimulating decarbonisation, £1 billion for decarbonisation of public sector buildings, and then £2 billion of decarbonisation in terms of energy efficiency retrofit of the existing housing stock. Now, anyone who's been in the industry as long as I have knows that government talks an awful lot about zero carbon, net zero, decarbonisation, energy efficiency retrofit, and most of these programs haven't been a success. So there is a question mark about that. In terms of the negatives, it's worth considering that productivity on site on construction projects is still 10 to 15% lower than it was pre-COVID due to social distancing and other safety measures. So that means projects cost more and they take longer. So the key question will be who pays for that? We're increasingly hearing that main contractors and main house builders are asking specialists and subcontractors to cut rates. So that could be an issue given that cash flow is a big issue for small and medium-sized companies. After this demand has fed through and when we finally have an end to the furlough scheme, then we do have a question about where the demand is going to come from after that, particularly on housing, refurb, but also more generally within spending in the economy and therefore commercial and industrial demand. And then it's worth raising a question around long-term impacts. Have we structurally changed work and spending patterns from people increasingly working from home? Now, a lot of people are very quick to call death at the office because it makes a nice headline, but realistically, that's not likely to be the case. People who are working from home at the moment are unlikely to remain 5 days a week working from home. Equally, you're unlikely to find that there'll be 5 days a week in the office as well. So what you're ending up doing there is reducing the existing space for existing offices space, retail space within urban centres, and leisure space as well, which puts a question mark over who's going to be investing in new offices, retail and leisure space, particularly within big cities like London. In terms of overall for this year, we're coming towards the end of this year, so 2020 is probably not the biggest issue for most people looking at this presentation. You're probably more interested in what's going to happen next year, especially given that looking at the year as a whole for this year is slightly distorted by the fact that we had the sharp falls in the first half of the year and sharp recovery in the second half of the year. But overall for this year, we end up 15% down, but it really depends which sector you're operating in. If you're working on industrial, particularly factories construction, then you're going to find that activity's fallen far greater than that. Firstly, because it was hit during the social distancing restrictions in the initial lockdown, but also activity hasn't recovered quickly. And the same can be said for commercial activity. Housing is slightly different in that it was the sharpest sector in terms of falls during the social distancing restrictions. Since then, it's recovered sharply, but when you take the year as a whole, it still ends up being around 20% lower than it was in 2019. And then the least affected sector, as I mentioned earlier, you're looking at infrastructure, which overall this year, we're only anticipating a small fall of 3%. Looking towards next year, we're looking at growth across all of the sectors, mainly because you're looking at 2021 compared with a year that's been badly hit, 2020. So what we're looking at is 13.5% growth next year, which sounds great, but as I say, you're coming from a low point this year. And even if activity remains at levels it has done in September, October, November, even if it remains at that level, you still end up with most of that growth because of the hit in the first half of the year. Looking at the key areas of growth within this 13.5% growth next year, you're looking at infrastructure, which government is really looking to push. Clearly, you've got HS2 within that, but you've got a raft of projects and programs, and we'll hear more about that in the National Infrastructure Strategy this week. I realize most of you are not directly feeding into infrastructure because you're not making rail tracks, you're not making ballast, you're not digging tunnels, but it's always worth considering infrastructure, because if you're building Tottenham Court Road Station for Crossrail, for instance, which is all occurring at the moment, you have a £400 million commercial tower next to it. And so your products may not go into the rail tracks or the tech that goes with Crossrail or the tunnels, but you do feed into the offices, residential retail that goes alongside the infrastructure. So it's always worth thinking about that. One of the other key sectors that we have growth in is public housing, RM&I, and that's largely based around the cladding remediation work from government. In terms of the key recovery and the issues and risks around it, the key risks are the second national lockdown. Clearly that finishes on the 2nd of December and we go into a tier system of regional local lockdowns. What we don't know is once we break for Christmas, New Year and get into January, do we have the reimposition of a national lockdown? At this stage, it looks not, but if you go back 2 months ago, we weren't looking at a national lockdown then either. So things change quite a bit. In terms of government policy reliance, which is the second point, if you look at the key areas of growth that we've had so far, you're looking at infrastructure, which is funded by government largely. You're looking at cladding remediation, which is largely funded by government. You're looking at housing, which has been stimulated by government through policy. And then you're looking at refurb, which has recovered rapidly since the social distancing restrictions eased, which is closely linked to the housing market. People tend to do refurb activity within 6 to 9 months of changing property. That's all well and good as long as government keeps sustaining activity through its stimulus. The margins and productivity issue, I mentioned it earlier. And then the final point clearly is around Brexit, which I'll get onto now. I'm well aware that you will have been speaking about Brexit quite a bit throughout this period, so I'm not going to go into too much detail because covering all of the Brexit issues is quite complex, but I'll try and highlight just a few points from our Brexit update. Overall, our estimate is that we've got a 60% probability of a free trade agreement at the top level, which means the key issues are dealt with, but then a lot of the detail will need to be determined within 12 months. But that still means that there's a 40% probability of a no deal, disorderly Brexit, and clearly there's a high margin of error around these estimates of probabilities. So we do have to take account of the possibility of a no deal. The key issues from our perspective are that businesses are still not clear on exactly what admin and certification delays that they've got to prepare for. Many firms have not had the chance to build up stocks because they've had a sharp recovery in demand since the initial lockdown eased. So because house building, refurb, and infrastructure have grown significantly, a lot of companies have just been selling all the products that they've been making, in which case you haven't had the chance to build up stocks. And some firms have told us across different products that they can't justify the expense again because they spent money stockpiling before the 2019 Q1 deadline, before the October 2019 deadline. It's worth highlighting that a lot of the focus has been on tariffs, but most tariffs on construction products are between 0 and 10%, albeit at the higher end of those for some timber products. But still, 0 to 10% is not very much compared with a lot of products like food and automotive related products, which are in the 30 to 50% tariff range. So if we were to have a free trade agreement, it's not solely the tariffs that's the issue for us. It's the tariffs on imported products, materials, components, combined with the additional financial and administrative burden. And then that's exacerbated by the fact that if we were to have a no deal, we'd expect significant shortfalls in sterling against the euro and against the dollar. And for those of you who were around in 2016 will remember that when we had depreciations in sterling after the EU referendum, we had in the second half of 2016 a 15% fall in sterling against the euro, and we had a 17% fall in sterling against the dollar. And what we ended up with is imported products such as some timber, some imported insulation, rising by 20 to 30% in early 2017. So once you add the tariffs to the financial administrative burden to the depreciations, that's where some of the key issues come for us on the cost side, not solely the tariffs. Only 24% of products used in UK construction are imported, and 60% of those imported products come from the EU. But it's not just about the products. It's about the import materials, it's about the machinery components, even for products that are made in the UK. The key products we're anticipating will be affected by a no deal, if we were to have a no deal, are likely to be those products that are used in sectors that have recovered relatively quickly, and so there isn't a chance to build up stocks in advance. And if anything, demand is already outstripping supply already. So you're looking at some timber products, roofing products, and white goods. In terms of EU-UK trade issues, or you could say EU-GB trade issues, or EU-GB-NI trade issues, from our perspective, the biggest issues are likely to occur primarily around where it's lorry traffic, because you're checking drivers as well as products. The main focus from media tends to be around Dover, because that's where the greatest volume of traffic is, but that's not where most construction products come in. Most construction products come in on the East Coast, and so construction products is likely to be less affected than some sectors such as food, automotives, etc. However, that doesn't mean it won't be affected. Now, what I've done is, if you remember the UK GDP slide right at the start, we had a W-shape recession and recovery based around the second lockdown, which is the green dotted line. What I've done is added in our no deal scenario, which shows impacts of disruption in Q1, which is here. And effectively, it means that the fall in GDP in Q4 due to the second national lockdown just gets extended into Q1. And what ends up happening is that you've raised costs due to the tariffs, depreciation in sterling. And so the direct impacts of that mean that you end up with GDP 3% lower than in the W-shaped scenario in Q1, but it ends up 11% lower than what was in the blue-gray line, if you like, the line that was going up here, which was the normal sense of recovery we were expecting if we hadn't had a second national lockdown. But as I say, that's not what our main scenarios anticipate. These are just provisional, based around what happens if there's a no deal. And if there were to have a no deal, the impacts on the construction sector are likely to hit three main areas. They're likely to hit private housing, commercial, and then private housing RM&I. So what we're anticipating is that overall total construction ends up 6% lower than in our main scenario, but you end up with infrastructure and public housing RM&I not affected very much. You've just got the initial disruption in Q1, but you largely catch up on that throughout the rest of the year. The biggest impacts are in sectors which are speculative development sectors, private housing, commercial, or a sector that is dependent upon consumer confidence and consumer spending. And that's the private housing, repair, maintenance, and improvement sector. What I would like to do is stop there for the moment, but I'm perfectly happy to take questions on any of our scenarios or any of the specific sectors that you may want to get into. And also in the presentation, my details are there should you want to contact me after the presentation. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Noble. That was excellent. Thank you very much. It was a good run through all of the different points. While I just wait, I think we're going to wait for some of the other questions to come in. And then we're going to, if you can stay with us, have a quick panel discussion as well with all of the speakers today. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points. You sort of gave a nightmare scenario at the end on the no deal scenario, but even with your projections for 2021, you still see, or sorry, housing was down 20% for 2020 and then up 10% in 2021.
Yep.
And likewise with some of the RMI activity, and these are some of the biggest markets for TTF members in particular. New build housing or repairs and maintenance and so on. Even with that 10% uptick in 2021 that we may see for the housing market, it's still going to be below 2019 output levels. When would you forecast that to come back to sort of parity, or for that output to kind of regain where it should be, if you like?
I think we're anticipating getting back to around pre-COVID levels of private house building output in 2022, but it depends very much on government policy, and the risk may actually be on the positive side here, which is that at the moment we're basing our scenario upon the fact that the stamp duty holiday and Help to Buy in its current form come to an end in March. On the 31st of March, and so we face a bit of a cliff edge. My personal view would be that it wouldn't be a surprise if government extends the stamp duty holiday because of that cliff edge. And what the government wouldn't want to do is see housing red hot at the moment because it stimulated it, plus that pent-up demand is coming through, and then fall very sharply as soon as you get to April. And if anything, they may have to announce the extension a bit earlier than that, because there is a backlog of transactions at the moment. And given that it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get through transactions, then they will have to extend it by the end of January, at least, if they are going to extend it. And the 31st of March is a bit of a cliff edge, not only because of the stamp duty holiday Help to Buy, but also that's when the furlough scheme ends and the self-employment income support scheme ends. So I think if we get closer to that time, then government will extend some of these programs if necessary to prevent large increases in unemployment, to avoid a sharp drop-off in the housing market. Government is very clear it wants to stimulate housing, energy efficiency retrofit, and infrastructure. So if we get an extension of those programs, then it actually is a positive risk to our scenarios, and we would have to upgrade our scenarios. But we can't do a scenario based upon the fact that we hope government will extend it.
Yeah. It wouldn't be too unusual, though, to see a U-turn in policy, so we can keep our fingers crossed. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of other points that you mentioned there. One of them was about the fact that actually a lot of supply chains cannot build stocks at the moment for next year, and that is certainly true within the timber sector. We've seen supply chains go quite haywire or behave in a manner which we're completely unaccustomed to during the COVID period, with the DIY sector going absolutely nuts in every single country in Europe simultaneously. So it wasn't just the UK. Likewise, so the material just isn't there to build stocks in the first place, and I think the Brexit fears still hang over certain companies within our membership who built stocks previously, only to find out that there wasn't the cliff edge and so on. Do you have insight into the similar behaviour from other similar supply chains, bricks or blocks or any of the others that are members of the Construction Products Association, and how that might then also impact?
It varies a lot by product. Some products, there aren't the stocks there. like roof tiles, like plaster, etc. For other products like bricks, concrete, there are, and it depends which sectors you're feeding into. If you're feeding into new house building and refurb, then demand has rapidly recovered, and the supply chains haven't recovered as quickly. So that's where the issues are most likely to be. But if you're supplying into other sectors, such as commercial, industrial, basic repairs, maintenance, there isn't as big an issue. And also it depends whether it's imported or not. So
Yes.
for some domestically made products like brick, most of the input materials are also UK based. You don't want to be shipping these things halfway around the world because they're big and heavy. So actually there are ample stocks there, and there isn't really such an issue. Plus they have space on their sites to store stocks. They're not dependent upon external warehousing, which is also in very short supply.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much, Noble. I'd like to bring our other speakers back in. Nick and Adrian and Dafydd, I think, are all there joining us at the top of the screen. And I was just going to open this up now to see if we have any further questions for our speakers. And I'm going to start. I'm afraid, Noble, you were the last to speak, but you got the first one who's got the question up from over to you. And it's deal or no deal. If you're a betting man, deal or no deal?
I'm not a betting man, but I would. But I would, as I say, our scenarios are based on a 60% probability of a deal and 40% probability of no deal. But the high margin of error around that means that they're not that different in terms of probability. But we're anticipating the end of the first week of December a deal. But then I guess if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I probably would have said by autumn we would have a deal. So deadlines tend to get pushed back and pushed back. But I suspect the simple answer to the question is at the end of the first week of December, then I'm anticipating a deal that will be announced, but then it will have to get through Parliament, and then it will have to get through the EU Parliament, which might require some sort of continuity agreement, given that may have to get through the EU Parliament early next year in January. Okay. So it gets complicated.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it is a tricky thing, and I have to say, from the conversations we've had, looking at the deal on offer, it is fairly thin. And so, although not as thin, obviously, as a no deal, but you know, the difference between the two wasn't as enormous as I think was muted during the initial stages of discussing Brexit. Nick, I'm going to bring you in here. We've had a few questions here about not just imports of timber, but actual timber frame kits and timber frame sets. Questions really are that these kits are a mixture of sawn products, laminated, planed goods, and so on. Where do they get classified within the tariffs and customs codes and all that sort of stuff?
Prefabricated buildings are not in section 44 or with other wood products. They're in section 94, I think. So 9406 for prefabricated buildings. So it wouldn't, I think they're either of wood or other. So I don't think it matters particularly what type of wood. So all prefabricated buildings are under that code 9406, I think.
Okay. So we'll tell them to go back.
I'll add some information on the TTF website about prefabricated buildings.
Okay. Thank you. And just on a similar point, we had a number of questions. I didn't want to go through every single question that had come up on the list, but there were quite a few about Northern Ireland, and there is still considerable confusion about what's happening in Northern Ireland, and whether it's due diligence, whether it's customs, whether it's UK CE or CA marking, and so on. Do you think we are going to have to organise specific webinars on Northern Ireland and the trade of goods there, and the paperwork that's involved?
I think we probably will, but there's not a great deal of transparency around that. The Northern Ireland Trader Service is taking up a lot of that slack. So we have a border operating procedure for Great Britain, which is published in a lot of detail. There isn't currently a border operating procedure for Northern Ireland. So we don't have that level of detail that we've got for the rest of GB. I think there are some serious risks there. I mean, Adrian might be able to add some further light on this, but if you're bringing goods from Ireland into Northern Ireland and then they're coming to the UK, what checks are taking place for those kinds of goods? Is that something you might want to comment on, Adrian?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as I said out in the presentation, the requirements at the end of the transition period will be that there are no new checks from goods coming from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. So any existing checks that companies in GB would be required to undertake as they source goods from Northern Ireland, they would still need to take, but there won't be any new checks. In terms of beyond that, I think the regulatory framework, we've tried to be as clear as we can about that. Happy to clarify anything which remains unclear, but essentially the UK timber regulations will apply to Great Britain, so England, Scotland and Wales, and EUTR will continue to apply to Northern Ireland, and that's the position going forward, and that is obviously in line with the Northern Ireland Protocol and the withdrawal agreement. But yeah, that's the position there at the moment.
Okay, and I was just looking through to see that we've picked up all of the different sections of the questions that we've had. There's so much about Northern Ireland that I think we will need to organise something with yourselves, Adrian, with other departments as well, quite possibly HMRC and so on, just to get clarity. I think we have the clarity over the basic model, but I think there is clearly confusion there, and we may bring some of the teams in from the port authorities operating there as well. Dafydd, you don't operate in Northern Ireland, do you, as ABP?
It's the one bit of the UK we don't operate in, as it happens.
Yes, probably why you've got such clarity on the answers you gave earlier. But
there was a question in there, Dave, about the documentation that drivers would need to travel between Dover and Calais. I don't know if I can't really add anything to that, because as I understand it, the driver's handbook that the government is due to publish hasn't yet been produced. So we don't exactly know what the system is going to be for those drivers coming in from Dover into Calais. Is that something you could comment on, Dafydd?
I don't know is the straightforward answer, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, Dover is not one of our ports, and I focus very much on what's going on in Humber. Apologies.
Okay, but is there? Do you think there's sufficient detail for lorries that are coming with a driver into the Humber ports?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the onus has got to be on the hauliers themselves to make sure they are aware of the details of it. I think there's quite a lot of information out there, though, and certainly the conversations we've had with the haulage sector, they're pretty keen to what they need to do. And if you'd asked me that question 6 months ago, I was quite nervous about it. I'm less nervous about it now than I was, because the haulage sector do seem to be aware of the fact that this is coming and coming fast.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. Sorry for interrupting.
It is a well-known bugbear of the Road Haulage Association, and the chief exec is asking for that documentation and guidance to be published on a regular basis. He's doing that. We've had just Adrian, there's a question for you. Has come in about the UKTR. Can you clarify whether Great Britain includes Jersey?
Okay, so it's
I'm not sure a great deal of timber
it's a
comes
crown
in from
dependency. I think Deanne might be able to.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
So Jersey is a crown dependency, and it has chosen not to adopt EUTR. So
It's chosen not to adopt the EUTR.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
So
it's crown dependency, so it gets to choose which of our regulations it chooses to adopt or not.
what a lovely position to be in. So I assume then, if our members are selling timber for a project within Jersey, and there's a company there that is bringing stuff in either from Great Britain or from the EU, they do not have to undergo due diligence checks then, is that right?
Yeah, so if the product is placed on the market in the EU or on the UK, you will need to do due diligence in those. If it then moves, depending on the regulation, if it then moves to Jersey, we do not enforce any regulations related to UKTR or EUTR in Jersey.
Okay, fantastic. That's clear. I hope that answers the question. Just a couple of other things coming in, and we'll give it another couple of minutes here. But there was on the tariffs question, Nick and Adrian, you may be able to help on this as well. We had a bit of a conundrum about high tariffs coming in on LVL, a laminated product, but then there were no tariffs, or there was a 0% duty, I should say, on eye joists coming in, which were made with LVL. However, there is obviously large manufacturing base in the UK manufacturing them who would be disadvantaged under that regime. If they bring in the components, they pay a high rate of duty before manufacturing in the UK. If they bring in the finished manufactured product of the eye joist, they will be paying a high rate of duty, therefore disincentivizing the whole concept of UK manufacturing. As far as I know, we've written to all of the departments to flag this, and have not had a satisfactory response, Nick.
My understanding is that the UK global tariff was a reflection of the existing EU tariff in terms of structure. So I guess as we go forward, it will be up to the Great Britain to decide how it wants to apply duties and tariffs. So we need to have that discussion after the 1st of January, really. It's not going to be in place for the 1st of Jan, but we clearly there are different pressures on the UK than there is on the EU. So the EU has its own plywood industry, which would need protection from external imports. So there seems a logical reason as to why duty might be applied. The UK doesn't have its own plywood industry, so that would infer that there would be more opportunity for reducing those tariffs. But we do have a wood-based panels manufacturing sector that might be impacted through cheap imports of plywood. So it's about having those discussions about what's good for the UK and then changing our tariff structure to reflect that.
Okay, yeah, and just for the record, since those queries were raised earlier this year, we have written to to the departments involved, and had a fairly uniform answer that, and it does look, I don't like to accuse our government of using such tactics, but it does look almost like each minister and civil servant has copied and pasted exactly the same letter, saying that the new tariff regime is absolutely wonderful and puts us in a much more competitive position as the UK, and entirely fails to address the questions that we've asked. And they have said that we can come back and talk to them again in 2021. Which,
can I just say, David, that we've had exactly the same response across a lot of different products, and speaking to a lot of other industry sectors as well, they've had the same response. And a lot of these issues didn't matter so much when the choice was importing the input materials or components and manufacturing as compared to importing the whole product when it was from the EU within the same environment.
Yeah.
Now we're leaving, I think, as we discuss trade agreements with different countries, every industry sector is going to be going to government and pointing out these anomalies, if you like, or distortions. And if you can see it in boilers as well, where the WTO implied tariff is substantially different on the whole boiler than it is compared with some of the components for the boilers, which didn't matter up until the end of this month. And so we import some of the components and manufacture boilers here. However, after the end of December, it will be an awful lot cheaper to import the whole boiler.
yes.
So it doesn't help you in any way, but I think we've experienced that issue across lots of different products, and other industries are experiencing those sort of distortions. And I think as we discuss trade agreements, we're going to find that lots of groups like yourselves, like ourselves, like SMMT, across all industry sectors, chemicals, are going to go to government, and there's going to be a big fight for highlighting these distortions and trying to iron them out, and it will take time. And that's assuming they're listening.
Yes, no, it does seem that there's going to be quite a lot of sectors who, once a deal or a no deal is presented, will be then scrambling for a return to essentially the same rules they had in the past under the single market for their particular sector. So we've had this very similar question about timber window manufacturers and imported windows as opposed to laminated timber sections. The laminated timber sections will be subject to tariffs, and I'm not sure about the imported timber windows. We'll have to check. We have got the details up on our Brexit site, have we not, Nick? The table for the tariffs on those, so we can check against there. But the same principle applies. It can act as a disincentive for UK manufacturing. I think those are all. We kind of covered the themes of all of the questions from our audience today. If anybody does have any further questions, please do send them in to myself or to Nick, individually to each of the speakers if you have their details there, or you can come in via ourselves at the TTF.